Welcome to another edition of Expanding Mind. I'm your host, Eric Davis, continuing our conversations about the cultures of consciousness. And conversation is the word. One of the tendencies I found in doing the show 8 years now is there's a tension between having a conversation and having an interview. And as a journalist for many decades, I don't do so much of it right now, but I used to do a lot of it. I'm pretty good at the interview mode, and in fact, when I meet people, I'm often much more comfortable asking them about their lives than sharing much of mine. It's a very natural thing for me to do, to kind of tune in and figure out what people are going on, what people are talking about, what they're on about, where they're coming from, and I love it. It's fun, so it makes me a good interviewer. But I realize that, especially now, for whatever reason, that I'm more interested in pushing it towards a conversation. And I think that already happens even if someone puts out a book, I'm excited about the book, I read it, I get where it's coming from, we have a talk, and I ask them about the book, and da-da-da. That often flowers into a conversation, and to the degree that this is a successful podcast, the meaning of which I don't really know how to assess, but to the degree that it is successful, it's partly because I think that it's not really an interview show, even though I'm a good interviewer. And so it was partly with these thoughts in mind that I invited my good old friend Ed Phillips on the show today to just talk about, we'll see what we're going to talk about. We had a few ideas that we were bouncing around in email and such, and we don't see each other very much anymore. I met Ed through the internet. You've all heard of the internet, but this was a very different internet in the early to mid 1990s through. I think the most steady thing in my entire online life has been my largely lurking on the Net Time mailing list, which is a collection of sort of left-wing / anarchist media critic, hacker, programmer, rabble-rouser types. And they've always kept a nice strain of critical anti-technology hype going on in my mind, and it also led to some friendships, including Ed's. When I moved out to San Francisco, he was already here, and so he was one of my first friends, though unfortunately he has long ago moved on to the wilds of Oregon, so we only occasionally chat, but they're always stimulating. He always takes me a little farther than I think I'm ready to go. I also want to mention that he tweets as Faustroll and also has a blog called Congruenz, Congruenz, which has got some really powerful reflective essays. He's not trying to pander to the speedy, in-groupy, hyper-referential pop culture blat of so much. I just made that word up, by the way. Of so much online writing. These are thoughtful, deep, and sometimes, again, rather challenging exploration. So I said, hey, let's have a conversation. So Ed goes, all right. So here he is. Hi, Ed.
Hey, Eric.
How's it going, man? You're in our nation's capital, aren't you?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Did you go see the Burning Man exhibit?
I did. Yeah.
What was your impression?
It's neat to see it infecting the larger populace with some of its twists and turns. It was pretty amazing to see all the families and a lot of kids interacting with it. I got the sense of a hyperstition or some turn in the culture going out into ever larger interactions, or a deeper interaction with a greater pluralism of the society. So that's kind of amazing to see that.
Yeah, for sure. For me, it's just so confusing because, this is a theme I've mentioned many times. People have been listening to the show, and it's one of those we can talk more about it. One of the things we've been talking about recently is this kind of weird tension when you have a public voice and you're being listened to by people you don't know and having some influence on the kind of larger world of discourse. There's this weird tension between vulnerability and exposure. Like there's some things that are very personal to me that I think are good to reveal, even if they're vulnerable, because they might involve me suffering or not knowing or discovering contradictions about myself. And clearly there's a lot of hunger for that out there. People like it when people they're listening to who they don't actually know personally, sort of go through this stuff. And there's the rise of the memoir and all that. And at the same time, there's sort of also a sense about the real need to kind of keep certain walls, certain things concealed. And that's a very interesting tension that I wouldn't really have thought about. Not that I'm that well known, but I'm well known enough that it's like an issue that I have to wrestle with. Anyway, this is a long way of saying that one of the vulnerabilities that I have is realizing that how it's complicated for me, having written about this stuff as well as participating in it for so long, all this underground stuff, whether it's occultism or psychedelics or Burning Man or, neo-shamanism, traveler culture, all this kind of underground stuff. And, so many of these things, almost all of them, are now sort of part of the mainstream in some sense. And they're being claimed by others. They're being spoken about by others. And it's a weird feeling because, on the one hand, when that shift happens, you no longer can own it. And it made me realize, like, I kind of like, it wasn't like I owned Burning Man. I mean, I wasn't even that deep into it. I didn't know a lot of the major players. I wasn't like super inside the like, A-line circle of Burning Man, but it was something I've been going to since '94. And I certainly identified with it and identified as someone who was kind of writing or trying to be a public intellectual from that space. And so now that it's sort of part of the mainstream, it's this weird sense because you kind of don't own it anymore. And then along with that is my realization that while I was always attracted to certain things about all these subcultures, again, magic, psychedelics, weird religion, travel culture, Burning Man, San Francisco, New Age weirdness, whatever, all those things, that there was always part of the charge was that they were at some level marginal or not part of like the mainstream, something that your parents didn't quite understand. And now that it's sort of all out there, there's this really weird kind of crisis of like identity because it's like my whole shtick, not just in public, but also just in my mind, was sort of based on having this kind of foot in something that was outside. And it's not really clear that outside exists anymore. So when I heard about Burning Man at the Smithsonian, I was just like, oh man. I mean, like on the one hand, I'm totally psyched because like all those kids from the Midwest are like going, what is this stuff? And, great, and I think everyone should go to Burning Man at this point. I mean, it's like a great thing to blow your mind. I mean, it's extraordinary. And at the same time, there's this kind of weird loss, a sort of attachment to something that's no longer the case.
Yes, I that's fascinating. I hold that tension in myself as well, where so many of us have realized that the really interesting things are taking place at these boundaries or these margins, and we've embraced that. And I think we also want other people to experience it. But the group itself is such this massive normalizing entity that it will turn everything into something it can share across its commonality, whether that's a price in the markets or just some really generic affect that doesn't have any of the subtlety of what emerges in the margins. And then you have this weird thing where the outsider has become a shtick, It's fascinating. One of the things that blew me away was the exhibit is in the Renwick, which is right next to the White House, which is really this kind of amazing thing where you walk across this walkway where you can sort of see the White House and all these tourists are hanging out there, and then you go to the Renwick Gallery and there's this Burning Man exhibit going on there, and it's fascinating to see these worlds so close to each other, but with the access to it still kind of hidden in a way, unless people knew that the Burning Man exhibit was going on in there, unless they are inclined to look at art, and unless they have that contemplative drive of some or even interest, they're going to walk right past it. They're not going to go into it. So there's always that. It is sealed in some sense. That's that open secret paradox. It's being made generic, which is what the group is doing. The group makes things generic, which does allow us to interact with each other at the large scale that we are doing right now. And yet we can lose that access to the variance or to the margin inside of ourselves. And I think that's where it really comes down to.
Well, that's the thing. What I was wrestling with is that here's another version of this conundrum, which is in a way a classic one. The stories of subcultures in the West, in America, post-war subcultures. Let's say it's this basic line about the point of whether you're selling out or whether you've been co-opted. Those are all the words we use: co-opted, selling out, absorbed, or you got something that people like, and it influences society in a positive way, and it goes out there and change happens, and that's just sort of, it's like this baseline story, and it's at the heart of Burning Man as well. When I wrote the libretto for this rock opera, How to Survive the Apocalypse. This Burning Man rock opera that we did about a decade ago. Next year will be a decade from the main performance, although it had a couple different versions, and it was really fun, really rich thing, and it was really interesting to write about. I mean, I loved writing the lyrics for the song, but the core tension in the story is between these early characters at Burning Man, when it starts out and it's just super edgy and nobody knows about it, and it's just raw, and there's no laws, there's guns, there's no organization, it's dangerous, and then at some point as it grows, there's clearly a bifurcation point. And some people, including Larry Harvey and most of the board, were like, we're going forward. We're going to start making it more like a city. We're going to start making it more organized. And it's that kind of process of development, of civilization, if you will. And there were some early people who jumped off the boat famously after 1996. And they kind of held the sort of high bar of the underground, of what we do is secret, once you start making all of those compromises, then things fundamentally change, and the mystery that motivates this becomes impossible. And so this is like this basic conundrum that exists in so much cultural production. And so my version of it now is like okay, it feels sort of precious and kind of I don't know what the word is exactly, but to just hold on to it was better before the underground. It was better when mindfulness was just on the fringe of the real passionate ones. Like it's lame now that mindfulness is part of corporate America. And I'm like, can I really say that? No, I can't really say that. If all these people are able to use a little bit mindfulness to bring a little bit more something into their lives, to crack the sort of death drive that that dominates our sort of busyness and our quest for the ego's quest to maintain itself and to claw its way forward in the world, and like the idea that some people have access to this is bad. It's just so lame. And yet there is something that is lost. There's something real that is lost when things go mainstream. So my question is where's the new edge? Where's the new margin? Is it in my soul? Is it actually just among me and my friends? Is it Is it between me and nature? I just don't know. It might not be able to take a cultural form anymore, because anything that gets rolling in today's environment just gets absorbed into the internet machine so quickly, and discussed and blogged about and attacked and overcoded and politicized in all these sort of almost algorithmic ways that we see on Twitter. And so it doesn't really look like there's space for that kind of underground cultural expression or discovery, with some very few exceptions. But where does that energy go?
Yeah, I think that energy is in us, in our ability to be with what is, and to hold that tension, and not turn away from looking at the difficult sides of it. At the same time that we realize, that's that thing that you and I have been talking about for years about reverie. It can be included in our reverie. We can be the ones that notice these things for ourselves and realize the depth that the moment is coming out of, in every moment for us. However generic it might appear to a large group of people who are trying to index it, and however generic everybody might be trying to make themselves appear to be for others, which is, what goes on in the group. That's that constant activity in the group where everybody's trying to appear to be something for other people. When you dig in there, you find underneath in all of these people this wild, unwoolly or unwieldy, woolly reality that is the real of each one of these people, all sort of pretending to get along and go along and do all these things. And so it's this amazing thing to realize that how gnarly it is, and because we've been playing in these spaces for a long time, we know how gnarly we are.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, that's one of the things that I'm always reminded of when we talk, or when I read your stuff, is your call to kind of stay with the difficulty, or stay with the inner madness, or stay with the depression or the despair or the looking unto death, not in a way where you're just indulging in it, or just kind of submitting to the ruminative fictions that in so many ways drive something like depression. But at the same time, there's this like steady resistance to distraction, and to another iteration of the flight towards some kind of naive hope, or some kind of fantasy of pleasure or power. And that does seem to be really key to me now, that if part of what this conversation is about dare I use the term authenticity, or perhaps sincerity is a better term, because so many people have torn apart the even idea of authenticity. But if that's part of what we're talking about, this mystery that still exists, the edge, what it is in the marginal that is valuable and that is not translated well to the mass, it increasingly seems to me today that it has to do with like the pain of being alive, or the confusion of being alive right now, not just the sort of human condition that we know we're going to die, that we're losing our friend, whatever, all like that. That's part of it too. But it also seems that there's a particular way right now that our essential fears and hopes are being weaponized against us through media, through politics as a kind of affect game. And that there's a real power in really just looking at the real and not turning away from it, because it's hard to monetize that, because it's kind of a bummer. So there's something there that's not just about like facing up to reality, kid, and you're gonna die and you should like look at death and da da da. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to talk about the wrestling with the dark side, or the challenges of being human. But it also seems there's a particular kind of tonic to it now that makes it even more important to talk about, to to embrace in ourselves and among our compatriots.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be someone who has that ethic of being with the real is to be a person who helps lead other people into accept or beginning to become a little more aware of the range of their experiences, the range of possible emotions that are constantly going on in people, and because they're indexing themselves so much to the group and to these idealizations and the expectations that are put out by all of the supportive industries that are there to support all that unreality, and then it's thrown back and forth between people. To be a person who has that is to have earned the ability to communicate with other people, because people will intuitively know that you have really bit on this reality and chewed it and begun to actually digest it. And it will have a curious effect on people because that range is there in you. You've earned it, by actually tolerating some of these things that other people have considered intolerable, and that gives you an aliveness that carries you through whatever difficulties emerge, and they will emerge. That's the nature of the game.
Yeah, well, what it reminds me of is there's two things. Is that I've always been interested in terrible smells and in bitter food or bitter substances. And
I love that.
The terrible smells, I have a really good sense of smell, which is more of a curse than a blessing. And so, if I remember the first time I started noticing it, it was like a kid I was living in Greece, and I used to take the bus, and people didn't bathe as much there as they do in the States, and I was like, man, this is stank. This is nasty. And so when you're sensitive to smell, like I'm in cafes and I can smell the garbage that's outside in the alleyway. I'd be through a window or whatever, and I can smell the rotting mice in a pile so other people don't smell. And my mom tells me it gets even worse is at least for her. She as she got older, and I have the same thing. And there's some kind of weird feature there that I just at some point embraced. And I was like, well, if I got to smell it, I just it's like a mix. It's like you have like I'm going along in my life and I'm having a good day and whatever. And then there I am and there's a nasty smell. It's kind of like, I'm mixing a track or something, and it's got, happy beats, and there's like a major chord, and, it's going along, and then you kind of mix in some really nasty, distorted guitar or some kind of really depressing post-industrial noise or something. And it's just part of the mix. And so I've always been interested in when I sense the sort of dark or the repulsive or the that which you don't want in your scene, it's like to just kind of sniff it, to be like, oh, what's that about? Okay, what's this? Let's sort of see how that kind of folds in. And the same thing with eating bitter things. You're like, oh, it's bitter. And it's like, well, yeah, it's not killing you. What do you care? See what bitter is like. And those practices with sensation inevitably become allegorical. So that aspects of emotion, aspects of political situations, aspect of dealing with unpleasant or actively noxious people and situations can sometimes be sort of embraced, but not completely, not in a way that overwhelms me, because of developing this kind of willingness to take on some of this dark stuff. And I think a lot of that's what we're talking about, or that's kind of the conundrum, is how to look at the real and figure out ways of doing it that allows you to not get swallowed up by it, so swallowed up by it that you become stuck in depression, or you become isolated, or you become paranoid, or you become pessimistic with a capital P. And that so it's almost like it's a path of it's like a tightrope walk where you don't want to fall down, you don't want to fall, but you're in essence going farther and farther towards something that you're also kind of don't want to deal with.
Yes, that's excellent. I love that. I do those kind of things too, and I think this idea of reverie really fits into that. You feed on the real with your reverie capacity, and I practice having that available to me at all times, so that I have that little screen or place or little, I even call it my little scratch pad, where that's my place to register what's happening to me, and it's a place of reverie. It's like a little theater or a screen, and it's really interesting to me to notice that there are other people that are doing this, and to also notice that a lot of people that have gotten interested in meditation, and they do need to develop the skills of the more kind of CBT or cognitive skills, coping mechanisms, and all that stuff. But a lot of people are approaching meditation purely as a kind of set of coping mechanisms to almost kind of avoid the emotions. And what I've noticed is that, and I do see that in the great traditions as well, is that meditation has not in any way kept me from feeling the impact of my experience. And in fact, I've gotten more capable of feeling things, incredibly difficult experiences, strange events, opening to the unknown, states of absolute terror even. And what I'm working on is developing a capacity to register that inside of myself, and then respond creatively to the actual situation that's around me, and so allowing myself to, for example, be affected by other people and their mental state, and then finding some ways of being in that, and then responding creatively to it, so that I don't get stuck in those states, but I certainly feel them.
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of the challenge is the not getting stuck part. I mean, I tend towards depression, and so I can be knocked off my like middle, like my little middle path where I'm kind of accepting these things and moving forward and being open to all the emotional sway, and then I can like realize that I've spent the whole day kind of sunk in this way, and then that can be triggered by people. It can definitely be triggered by busyness, by the ordinary hassle of our complicated, hassle-ridden lives of technology and money flowing and this and that and all that kind of stuff. So it's sort of an annoying, it's like one of the things that I wrestle with is the return of the banal. It's like when I'm facing, death or, the political situation or, these things that have some kind of drama to them, it's a lot easier for me. But when I'm really just in the banal, that's where like the real resistance is sometimes. And I had a psychologist friend who talked about that. He said, back in Freud's time, it was all about sex, because sex was where the stuff hid. It was in those domains that people's real stuff hid. Now, because culture's changed so much about sexuality and repression and all these things, that it's not there anymore, and most people keep looking for it there. But he was all about it's in the banal, it's in the ordinary that the stuff lies, And it's so for me it's an interesting kind of balance. Is like, can I, so it's one thing to smell like the rotting mouse. But it's another thing to smell like in an office, that weird kind of metallic ionic smell of like the printer, like the printer paper, and it's got that weird like dull gray, like the horror of the cube farm kind of smell, or like burnt coffee in an office or something. And it's like that's a lot harder in a way, because it smells like despair. It smells like no exit.
Yes. I think that's really great that you're dreaming that. I think, I see people practicing misery. I mean, it's this amazing thing to watch, like people have got all their armor on and they're practicing misery. They're performing it for each other, and they perform the drudgery, and it's an elaborate performance, and it's very catchy. I think it's something we circulate around, and there are these gateways to more radically strange and weird places inside of ourselves that are right there at those borders of boredom and exhaustion. I mean, there's so much. It's just exhausting, the amount of stuff that's thrown at you, and then the banality of it, the boredom. So I've turned around and I'm like, oh wow, this is fascinating boredom, and the utter uniformity and the dreariness of it. It's fascinating. I wonder if it isn't some way that we're circulating around that because the alternative is even more unnerving, which is these much more open spaces inside of ourselves that we haven't that no one's really noticing or paying attention to. And that leads me to this tension that between the ordinary and the normal. Because I think the ordinary, in a deeper sense, in the sense that some of these philosophers are trying to dream the ordinary, or artists are, is this totally wide open, totally weird reality that we're living in. And then the normal is what the group is trying to reassure itself about by duplicating itself over and over again and normalizing. And that's what the group does. And it's beautiful for that. That's what the stock market's all about. That's what all this, it's about normalization. And we're fascinated by all these population studies and all this stuff. And everybody's become such an expert in the group and is completely neglecting their direct experience.
I actually want to get back to something you said before about meditation, because I think that was really a key point. And it's something that, we talk about meditation a lot on the show, and that the good way of framing it is that even if people are turning to meditation largely therapeutically or in the mode of like cognitive behavior therapy, where you're learning how your mind loops work, you're learning to disidentify, you're learning to create space around something that is a compulsion or an addiction, or just to shut down the chatter for a while, just as kind of a palate cleanser. Yeah, and those are all really good things, but that simultaneously you are developing what I like to think of for reasons I can explain, what I like to think of is this category of taste, of tasting, of being able to stay with whatever is happening and taste it. And that's why I use those examples from sensation, from smells or bitterness, is that there's a way in which meditation creates a mind that's incredibly sensitive and with very little overcoding, that's really able to open to what's happening. And for me, the metaphor of looking at that relationship rather than looking or observing, which is a lot of what you find in like Vipassana, where you observe the breath or you observe the arising of sensation. To my mind, that's a little Spock-like. To my mind, that approach underscores the Western tendency towards being a manipulator, a technological controller. There's too much control in that approach. But tasting is different, because you got to get involved with the object. But taste is sort of both the tasting the object, but also kind of breaking down the difference between an object and who you are. It comes inside of you. And so developing all of these skills to stay with things, to not get caught up in mind loops, to stay open to the world, is if you think about it like tasting, well, suddenly everything is kind of interesting. Like the most boring situation or a repulsive person that you're forced to deal with, or a bore at a party, I was just at a dinner table and I sat across from a boar, and I was like, oh yeah, it's going to be annoying. Like, here we go. Like, there's no way out. Like, let's see. Like, what's this going to be like? Almost as if like you were incarnated from some place where there was nothing interesting happening at all, and you find yourself back in the world, except it's kind of a shitty situation. So you're like, well, hey, this is still pretty good though. What is? Oh, look at boredom. Wow. Like to sort of develop the capacity to enjoy things that the group does not recognize as enjoyable is a very empowering thing that keeps alive that sensibility, that exploratory, that aesthetic juiciness that I think gets lost when we turn meditation or mindfulness into a technology of managing affect. It becomes too much a part of what we're already suffering from.
Yeah, that's it. That's really good. Yeah, I think people need that. That's the proximal reason why they go into meditation. It's because they're being overwhelmed and they're looking for some relief. And so that I honor that in people, that need. And there seems to be one simple way of talking about it is that there's two movements there. One is the need to get a little distance, to not be overwhelmed, to self-regulate, and then this need and the desire to make contact with the real, or with one's own emotions, with one's own direct experience. And when you have a robust enough ability to find your footing again, then you're more capable of letting go and being like, hey, I need to experience this directly. I can't afford to have all these buffers. I can't afford to convince myself that I'm an expert in the next moment because I'm not. And if I'm open to it, it's scary, as you said, but it's also so enlivening. And then I can be more creative in my response to whatever is appearing in the moment. I don't have to be in control, and I don't want to be in control. I want to let life happen. I want to see what's going to wash on shore in the next moment. Yeah.
Yeah, for some reason I've been recently also I've been thinking about is there's a tension between, let's say, sincerity and irony, and that part of what we could listen to what we're talking about partly as a call for sincerity, for not getting caught up in the usual stories, for being with what's actually happening, for being open to the real or the reality of our experience. And there's sort of a call towards, away from irony, away from this sort of referentiality, et cetera, towards this kind of sincerity that we often associate with the real, with what's really happening, the authentic truth. And yet there seems to be something in irony in all of this, there's a way in which irony can be used, or some kind of humor, or some kind of suspension from the kind of push of the real that is actually helps serve this process that we're talking about. I don't know if this is being obscure, so let me know if this makes sense to you.
That's right on. I'm so right there with you. That's so great that you mentioned that, because we desperately need irony, especially when so many things are being thrown at us in every moment. There's so many claims and calls upon us, and so many expectations that happen, or that are put upon us, or that we feel, or that we generate for ourselves. So we desperately need that, and I think that's missing in a lot of purveyors of cultural products, is that they're often lacking in a sense of humor, and I think it goes really well with sincerity, with the real. We need both of those aspects.
It's funny when what's coming to mind is earlier you talked about, how people get stuck in their misery and they perform their misery. And so I'm thinking of an example of like when you have like an encounter at Walmart, and then there's the person who's working behind the register, and there's sort of three options because they can be well, there's a number of options, but one is like however they behave, you can tell that they're bummed. Whatever, they're working at Walmart or there's something else going on, but there's either like an overt unhappiness, grimness, or a kind of really like like weak performance of the friendly person. Then there's the other side, which is almost equally disturbing when they seem absolutely genuinely happy in what they're doing. Because you're like, this is a weird scene. Like, I mean, it's just kind of a rough ride. Like, it's sort of like maybe you're just a preternaturally happy person, or you're so involved in some kind of delusion that you're not, you don't kind of feel the sort of weirdness of the scene. I mean, maybe Walmart isn't that example because it's not that bad to be a checker at Walmart, but that's just the one that came to mind. But what I'm trying to describe is the situation when you meet people in difficult situations where there's a joy and a real sense of connection, and at the same time, there's an acknowledgement that the situation itself is kind of lame. And that to me is like a use of irony that's not the irony that removes us from situation or makes us the know-it-alls or makes us above whatever's going on. There's a way of being ironic that's joyful and open to connection, but is not fooled or is not submersing itself in some kind of happy land talk of which we hear so much of these days. And that it maintains this edge, but it can be joyous. It can be a real connection.
Yeah, that's really good. Absolutely, it's that range. It's some it's across a certain range. You get that sense that person has a sense of the different of different perspectives on their experience, and so you can play in that space with them as well. You also have a range of perspectives, and the two of you can share in that place. And if another person doesn't, if they're only expressing one side of the dialectic, then you can notice that and be like, oh, okay, and sort of wonder, is this person in a manic state, or are they just completely lost in their misery, and just accept that, and it's also just a snapshot of that person too. You don't know. 10 minutes later, they could be, if they were in a manic state, 10 minutes later they could be so exhausted, or or throwing a fit, or you just don't know.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you a little more about Revery.
Yeah.
You talked about Revery earlier, and I think you gave a good sort of suggestion of what that means for you. But if you could be more detailed or more specific about what the practice of Revery is for you and how it serves the kinds of topics we've been talking about.
Yeah. It's something. There's a bunch of people that are practicing it in different areas, as like a lot of artists and stuff like that, and also psychoanalysts and people who work with other people. But for me, I think it's been a steady part of my life ever since I was pretty young, and it's something that I've cultivated more and more. So one thing I do is I do allow myself, and I have allowed myself a lot of contemplative time, so that I've been able to listen to myself in a deep way, and then and have cultivated this capacity to sort of dream while I'm awake, to allow my experience to emerge, and then allow for that to become almost dreamlike. And one of the ways that one guy talks about it, he says that every time somebody says something to him, he adds, "I had a dream" to what they said. So he can take in the most banal statements by people and dream it, and dream it from a symbolic perspective, and sort of play with it, and wonder what's emerging in the field in any moment. So it's kind of almost like this delay space or openness to experience, where one allows the depths of consciousness to emerge in a free way. So images could appear, or funny thoughts, or funny sensations. Someone could say something really, really funny or odd, and it could have a resonance for you. But part of Revery is creating that free space where it doesn't necessarily have to fit into any predefined plan. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. It could. You just don't know, and you just let it you hang out in that place, and you let it emerge for you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, one of the key terms there is resonance, for two reasons. One, resonance is a great metaphor, and it's no accident that we see it, play out in say discussions of poetry, or in even in like new age metaphysics in a way, because there's something kind of mysterious about resonance, in the sense that it's both something that we're doing and something that's being kind of in a way done to us. Like when we're resonating, it's because there's some other signal, there's some other idea or image or event that really strikes us in some way. So in some sense, we're not choosing to be struck by this particular thing. It just strikes us. And yet we also have to be kind of open to that possibility for it to happen at all. So there is some kind of active, we have to be active to allow resonance to happen. And it's almost like we have to carve out the echo chamber that allows resonance to really sing, so that we can notice it and not just like run over it as we repeat our more kind of formulaic, get ahead, algorithmic kind of mind. But that's sort of the question I have for you, is that how active do you feel like you need to get away from the kinds of thinking that in some sense the society is geared towards: processing information, handling information flow, using your presets to organize the world to be more efficient and to get ahead with what you need to do and get your ego feeling like it has some control? We need to interrupt that, or somehow in spaces in our lives, maybe even throughout all of our life, to have that space going or opening. How have you come to that? Is it something you've had to work on, or is it?
Yeah, for sure. It's constant work. I think, and then what's interesting I've noticed is that it took a lot of work to, and it still does, to really contact myself in a place of quietness and a deep listening to the totality of what's happening for me, and then what I have cultivated, and I think it's a really interesting thing to cultivate, is this ability to then allow more stimulated states of consciousness to be present and still have that contact with the reverie. So I can be in the midst of a social interaction, I can be in the midst of all kinds of crazy stuff, and I still have access to that reverie now. So it's another track that's running, and I can go back and forth, and then I can also be totally caught up or overwhelmed or these kind of things, and still have access to that reverie track even in the midst of the stimulus. But that takes a while. So lots of time being unplugged, lots of time just allowing for a spontaneity of my being, lots of toleration of states that I don't necessarily want to be in. lots of just allowing and trusting myself, even like a weird thought that I keep having to think, trusting that there's some reason why I am so hung up on something, if I am, and being with myself as I am for long enough for that to feel right and to fit for me in terms of my relationship to other people and my relationship to life.
Yeah, it's funny. What's coming to mind now is, in a way, coming back to the beginning of our talk, was I made this just distinction between conversation and interview, and in a way, that's sort of what we're talking about. Like a real conversation, you don't know where it's going, and it's a little weird to have it live and in front of an audience or whatever we're doing right now, where there's not really a plan, and maybe I say something and it's not really what I meant, or you say something and it's kind of obscure or whatever the thing is. And so there's a freedom and also a kind of risk that you don't know where you're going, where it's so much easier. This would be so much easier to interview, where I have a set of ideas. I'm going to ask you about what your position is on certain things. And then if you say something, maybe I'll clarify it. And some of that's obviously part of the conversation as well. But in a way, it's like to have that space you have when you have a real conversation. And I definitely feel like conversation is like one of those things that's right there in the open. It's an open secret. It's something that we all have the opportunity to do that is not just about being in ourselves and not just about being, unplugged and not dealing with other people. And yet the difference between having a conversation, being playful, being spontaneous, not knowing where you're going, resonating, picking up on odd things that the other person said and moving it in that direction, is sort of an open secret for creating the kind of space that we're talking about. Whereas too often, and I'm talking about myself as well, we follow the routine. We know the scripts. We're going to say the script. We're talking, hey, Mom, how are you doing? Da, da, da. It's just easier to interview, in my terms. It's easier to just kind of follow a script or to be very clear about who's the one who's driving the conversation. But if you have two people and neither of them's driving, then in a way you're opening up Revery in between people, so in the world, not just in your own head as you walk down the street alone and daydream. But it's a tough art. Like I feel like I usually fail. Like it's usually when I have these more open-ended conversations for the podcasts, I always feel that they were a failure. Even if people say, "Oh, I really love that," it always feels like I didn't do it, like I didn't provide something. It's a strange feeling.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's great. I think that's perfect. Conversation is such a skill. It requires such development. It's easier to be or to present oneself. I mean, it's probably not. It's easier to present oneself as a master, as someone who knows something, even if you're not really one, because you're not going to be opening yourself up. And you've said that to me many times, and I feel that the aliveness of the conversation. And I really honor that in you. I think you have a real capacity to enter into conversation with people, and you do constantly on the show. And I love that part of it, because to me, that's where it gets interesting, the places where we're not sort of pre-digested and setting some kind of set form that we're pretending to have mastered for other people. And I recognize that people perform that as a useful function in society and all that, but it's not that raw openness to conversation, and that takes a lot of skill, a lot of development. It's not easy. It's actually more challenging.
Yeah, and it's also just doing this. What's interesting is that I do this for free. I don't have a Patreon. I don't get any money. It's non-remunerative, so it's a hobby, a public service, a sort of form of reliable ego gratification. I mean, it's like I don't even know what it is and why I kind of keep doing it. But one of the interesting tensions is I notice the more anxious or the more kind of grasping I feel, the more I want it to conform to some idea of like a successful podcast where I'm participating in the conversation of the day, and we're all talking about Jordan Peterson, or we're all talking about Steven Pinker, and we're all talking about rationalism or Trump or whatever the thing is, and then like we're participating in it, and I really clutch after that sometimes. I really want, and I don't tend to look at numbers, and they're hard to do with podcasts anyway, and I don't really try to think about how the followers are happening, and I don't try to monetize it, and I don't do marketing to make it clean, and in general I do all that because I want to serve the conversation. I want to serve the mystery. But when I'm feeling weak about it, it just feels lame. Like, oh my God, I've got this platform now. I can really, start playing with the big boys and get up there and like be a figure and at the same time it's sort of too late, like I can't really do it, so I'm in this like I'm a schlemiel podcaster or something. Which I like. It's part of the charm, but it's so in addition to being difficult to have it, it's also sort of, I mean, it's difficult in that way too. It's difficult to I guess, be vulnerable in that sense, be vulnerable in not trying to be, a figure that way.
Yeah. And it's so much more interesting and exciting. My heart sinks when these, they have the, whoa, blah, 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 and it's all this preset thing, or the person who's supposed to be funny all the time, and you can hear it in that person's being, and everybody is hearing it. We're all hearing it. We can hear the range inside of your little heart. I mean, we know why you created that persona. I mean, we may not even admit it to ourselves, but it's obvious to all of us, and we're hungry for some open places inside of other people, inside of the media that we're constantly feeding on.
Well, in the mention of feeding on media, I'm afraid that our meal is done for the day. We have reached our max. Ed, thanks so much for joining me on Expanding Mind.